My best friend didn't just steal my fiancé. She humiliated me in front of hundreds of people at our annual charity gala, and she thought that was the end of me. But she had no idea who I chose to become after that night. Stick with me while I share my story, and if it touches you, don't forget to support our channel by hitting that subscribe button, dropping a like, and sharing it with the people you care about. My name is Corinne Whitlow. For most of my adult life, I believed loyalty was something solid, something you could stand on without fear of falling. I built my life around that belief. I trusted deeply. I loved fully. And I never imagined the two people closest to me would be the ones to pull the ground out from under me. Delaney Cross had been in my life for 12 years. We met in college, and from the start, we were inseparable. She wasn't just a friend. She was the person I called when I was scared, excited, confused, or heartbroken. When my mother died, she slept on my couch for a week just so I wouldn't be alone. I told her everything, my dreams, my fears, even my doubts about myself. I thought we were the kind of friends people write stories about. Then there was Graham Holloway. He walked into my life 3 years ago with an easy smile and confident energy. He made me feel safe at first. He listened carefully. He remembered small details. When he proposed to me, I truly believed I was stepping into the happiest chapter of my life. Delaney was right there beside me through it all. She helped me plan the wedding. She gave opinions on flowers, venues, and dresses. She hugged me and said she had never seen me so happy. Looking back, I wonder how long she had already decided to take my place. The night of our foundation's annual charity gala was supposed to be a celebration. It was something my family had hosted for years, and I worked hard to make it meaningful. I wore a deep blue gown and walked into that ballroom believing my life was steady and secure. But something felt different. Graham was distant. Delaney barely looked at me. They exchanged glances I didn't understand at the time. Then, in the middle of the evening, everything changed. Delaney stepped onto the stage unexpectedly. Her voice was calm, almost sweet. She talked about change and following your heart. And then she invited Graham to join her. What happened next felt like slow motion. The words came out of his mouth, but they didn't feel real. He spoke about finding love where he least expected it. He reached for her hand. And in that moment, under the bright lights, in front of donors, friends, and strangers, I understood. They weren't just confessing love. They were replacing me. I stood there, feeling every pair of eyes in the room turn toward me. Some looked shocked. Some looked embarrassed. Delaney looked satisfied. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I simply walked out of that room with my heart breaking quietly inside my chest. And that was the night I stopped being naive. Delaney and I met during our second year of college. We were assigned as partners for a marketing project, and within a week we were finishing each other's sentences. She was bold where I was careful. She spoke her mind without fear, while I measured every word. Somehow we balanced each other. At least that's what I believed. After graduation, our lives stayed closely connected. My family had long been involved in charity work, and I slowly stepped into that responsibility. Delaney had big dreams, but not many resources. When she wanted to start her own public relations firm, I supported her. I introduced her to contacts. I let her use space in one of our office buildings at a low cost. I never thought of it as a favor. I thought that's what friends did. When her short marriage ended badly, she moved into my guest house for almost 6 months. We would sit on the patio at night with glasses of wine, talking about how life never goes the way you expect. She cried on my shoulder more times than I can count. She told me I was the only stable thing in her life. Around that time, Graham became more serious about me. He started attending foundation meetings. He asked questions about donor strategy and expansion plans. I felt proud introducing him as my fiancé. Delaney seemed excited too. She often teased that we were the power couple. But slowly, small changes began. Delaney started canceling our weekly brunches, saying she was busy with new clients. Graham began working late more often. When I asked simple questions, his answers felt short and distracted. I blamed stress. Big events were coming up. The gala was approaching. Everyone was under pressure. There were moments that now replay in my mind differently. One afternoon, I walked into my office conference room and found them sitting together. They moved apart quickly, as if nothing was wrong. Delaney laughed and said they were just discussing sponsor seating arrangements. Graham barely looked at me. Another time, Delaney criticized the dress I had chosen for the gala. She said it didn't reflect leadership energy. It was strange, coming from someone who used to tell me I could wear a paper bag and still look elegant. I began to feel like an outsider in conversations that used to include me. Inside jokes formed that I didn't understand. When I entered a room, sometimes the silence felt too heavy. One evening, I overheard Delaney on the phone in the hallway outside my study. She didn't know I was nearby. Her voice was low, almost amused. "She has no idea," she said. "She really doesn't." I stepped out and asked who she was talking about. She smiled calmly and said it was a difficult client. I believed her. I trusted her so completely that doubt felt like betrayal on my part. Looking back now, I realized the signs were there. Not dramatic, not obvious. Just tiny cracks forming in something I thought was unbreakable. And while I was busy planning a future with my fiancé and supporting my best friend's success, they were quietly building something behind my back. The engagement party in Napa should have been one of the happiest weekends of my life. The vineyard was glowing in golden light, the air warm and soft, and our closest friends surrounded us with smiles and champagne. Graham stood beside me, his hand resting at my waist, speaking confidently about our future. Delaney stayed close the entire evening, almost like she was guarding something. At the time, I thought she was protecting me from stress. Now I understand she was protecting her secret. After we returned home, wedding planning took over my life. Guest lists, venue deposits, catering tastings. Delaney offered to help with everything. She insisted on managing parts of the planning, saying she had the experience to make it perfect. I was grateful. I trusted her taste. But little things began to change in ways I couldn't ignore anymore. When I talked about honeymoon ideas, Graham would seem distracted. When I asked about setting a wedding date, he suggested we wait until after the gala. He said the foundation event needed full focus first. It made sense on paper, but something in his tone felt different. Less excited. Less invested. Delaney also started making comments that felt slightly sharp. She would say things like, "Marriage changes people," or, "You have to stay interesting to keep a man like Graham." She laughed after saying it, but the words stayed with me longer than they should have. One evening, I was going over vendor contracts in my home office when Graham's phone, which he had left on the kitchen counter, lit up with a message. I wasn't looking for anything. I wasn't suspicious. But the preview caught my eye. It was from Delaney. Tonight felt risky. "We need to be careful." My heart dropped into my stomach. I stared at the screen for a long time, hoping I had misunderstood. Maybe it was about work. Maybe it was about a surprise for me. I told myself not to jump to conclusions. When Graham came back into the room, I asked casually what he and Delaney had been working on so late recently. His answer was quick, almost rehearsed. "Just sponsor negotiations." I nodded. I didn't mention the message. 2 days later, something else happened that I couldn't ignore. A hotel invoice printed accidentally in the shared office space at the foundation. The printer was connected to multiple email accounts for travel receipts. I walked past it without thinking, until I saw both their names on the document. Same hotel. Same dates. A weekend Graham had told me he was in Chicago meeting investors. A weekend Delaney claimed she was visiting a client in New York. The dates were identical. My hands started shaking. I checked the calendar in my phone. There was no mistake. In that moment, every small crack I had ignored suddenly connected into one clear picture. I didn't cry right away. I didn't scream. I just stood there staring at the paper, realizing that the two people I trusted most had been lying to my face for longer than I wanted to imagine. I confronted Graham that night. I didn't plan a speech. I didn't rehearse dramatic lines. I simply placed the hotel invoice on the kitchen counter and looked at him. At first, he tried to pretend he didn't understand. He glanced at the paper, then at me, like I was overreacting to something small. But when he saw that I wasn't backing down, his expression changed. The charm disappeared. "How long?" I asked quietly. He didn't answer right away. That silence told me everything. Finally, he exhaled and said, "It wasn't supposed to happen this way." Not an apology. Not regret. Just inconvenience. He admitted they had been seeing each other for months. He said it started as emotional support during wedding stress. He said he and Delaney connected in ways that felt more equal. According to him, I was too focused on legacy, on responsibility, on maintaining appearances. "You're stable, Corinne," he said. "But Delaney challenges me." Stable. Like I was furniture. I felt something inside me crack, but I kept my voice calm. I asked if he had planned to tell me. He nodded slowly. "After the gala." It's better timing. We didn't want it to affect donor confidence. The word echoed in my head. Later that night, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Delaney. We should talk after the event. Dragging this out publicly would only hurt the foundation. Let's handle it cleanly. Cleanly, as if betrayal could be packaged politely. I stared at her message for a long time. The same woman who had cried on my couch, who had called me her sister, was now coordinating the end of my engagement like it was a business transaction. I didn't respond. The days leading up to the gala felt unreal. We all continued preparing like nothing had changed. Meetings were held. Seating charts finalized. Speeches edited. At one rehearsal dinner, Delaney stood next to me discussing table arrangements, her voice steady, her expression friendly. If anyone had walked in, they would have seen two women working closely together. Only I knew she was planning to replace me. The night of the gala arrived. The ballroom shimmered with crystal chandeliers and polished marble floors. Guests wore black tie attire. Cameras flashed at the entrance. I arrived alone, even though technically I was still engaged. People asked where Graham was. I smiled and said he was greeting investors. I saw Delaney across the room. She looked confident, beautiful, almost glowing. Halfway through the evening, just as dinner ended and the program began, she stepped onto the stage without warning. That wasn't part of the schedule. Her voice was smooth and steady. She spoke about change, about following truth, about choosing courage over comfort. Then she said, "Sometimes we realize we're standing beside the wrong person." She turned toward the audience and invited Graham up. My chest tightened. He walked to her side, took the microphone, and without even looking at me first, he announced that he and Delaney had fallen in love. A wave of whispers filled the room. Then he reached for her hand, and everyone looked at me. For a few seconds, I couldn't hear anything clearly. The room felt distant, like I was underwater. I saw lips moving. I saw shocked faces. I saw people glance between me and the stage, unsure where to look. Delaney stood there beside Graham, her fingers intertwined with his, her chin lifted slightly. She didn't look ashamed. She looked proud, like she had just won something. Graham finally looked at me. There was no apology in his eyes, no hesitation, just a calm acceptance of what he had done. I felt my throat tighten, but I refused to cry in that room. I refused to give them the satisfaction of seeing me fall apart in front of donors, board members, and family friends who had known me since childhood. Instead, I slowly placed my wine glass on the nearest table and walked toward the exit. No one stopped me. As I reached the doors, I heard scattered clapping begin behind me. Not loud, not enthusiastic, just confused applause from people who didn't know how to respond. Outside, the night air was cold against my skin. My hands were shaking now, but I kept walking until I reached my car. Once inside, I finally let myself breathe. It wasn't loud crying. It wasn't dramatic. It was quiet and heavy. The kind of pain that sits deep in your chest and makes you question your own judgment. I replayed everything in my mind. Every brunch. Every hug. Every late-night conversation where Delaney told me she would always protect me. And I realized something. They didn't just fall in love. They planned this. They chose the gala on purpose. They chose the stage, the audience, the timing. They wanted to make it public, so I couldn't respond emotionally. So I would look weak if I reacted. They underestimated me. That night, after I got home, I didn't call anyone. I didn't beg Graham to explain further. I didn't text Delaney in anger. Instead, I opened my laptop. The Whitlow Foundation legally belonged to me. My father had structured it that way years ago. Graham was involved in advisory roles, but he had no ownership. Delaney's PR firm worked under contract, renewable yearly. And renewal season was coming. I reviewed documents carefully. I checked financial summaries. I looked deeper than I ever had before. Something inside me shifted. The heartbreak was still there, but it was slowly mixing with clarity. By the time the sun started rising, I had made one important decision. I wasn't going to scream. I wasn't going to chase. And I definitely wasn't going to disappear. The next morning, I requested an emergency board meeting. I didn't mention the betrayal. I didn't mention the gala. I simply said there were financial matters that needed review. Before that meeting, though, I made one phone call. Callum Pierce. He had been close to my father for years and now worked as a forensic financial attorney. We hadn't spoken much recently, but I knew one thing about him. He was careful, precise, and impossible to intimidate. When he answered, I didn't go into emotional details. I just said, I think something isn't right with the foundation accounts. I need you to look at everything. He didn't ask questions. He just said, send me access. Within 2 days, he called me back. His tone was serious. There are irregularities, he said. Not huge at first glance, but consistent. Administrative fees that were slightly inflated. Consulting payments routed through secondary accounts. Luxury travel expenses categorized under vague headings. Nothing dramatic enough to catch attention quickly, but enough to build a pattern. Some of those payments traced back to a consulting entity connected to Graham. Others were tied to branding retreats organized by Delaney's firm. They had been careful, but not careful enough. I felt sick reading through the reports. It wasn't just betrayal of my heart anymore. It was betrayal of the foundation my father built. The board meeting took place in the main conference room 2 days after the gala. The atmosphere was tense. Everyone had heard what happened publicly, but no one mentioned it directly. I stood at the front of the table calmly. Callum sat beside me. I presented the findings without raising my voice. I didn't accuse. I showed documentation. Dates. Transfers. Patterns. When I finished, the room was silent. One of the senior board members asked if Graham was aware of these transfers. Callum answered clearly. Based on signatures and authorization trails, yes. Another member asked about Delaney's firm contract. I informed them that her renewal would be suspended pending investigation. By the end of that meeting, 3 things happened. Graham was immediately removed from all advisory responsibilities. Delaney's PR contract was terminated. An independent audit was approved. No drama. No yelling. Just decisions. Later that afternoon, Graham called me repeatedly. I didn't answer. Delaney sent a long message saying I was overreacting and that financial misunderstandings could be explained privately. Privately. They wanted privacy when they had chosen public humiliation. I responded with only one sentence. The board will handle it. For the first time since that night at the gala, I didn't feel broken. I felt steady. The investigation moved faster than I expected. Word travels quietly in rooms filled with donors and investors. No one likes uncertainty when money is involved. Within a week, Graham's investment partners began asking questions. Within 2 weeks, 2 major donors paused their contributions until the audit was complete. I didn't have to say anything publicly. The numbers spoke for me. Delaney tried calling again. This time I answered. Her voice sounded different. Not confident. Not smooth. Just tense. You're destroying everything, she said. I stayed calm. No, Delaney. I'm protecting what was already mine. She tried to explain the payments. She said the consulting fees were strategic decisions Graham made to grow the foundation's reach. She said the retreats were necessary branding efforts. But there was something missing in her voice now. Control. A few days later, there was another small charity benefit hosted by one of our partner organizations. It wasn't as grand as the gala, but it was important. I had been invited months earlier. I went. The room was smaller, more intimate. Conversations were quieter. People watched carefully. About 30 minutes into the evening, I saw Delaney walk in. She was dressed beautifully, confident smile in place, clearly hoping to repair relationships before the audit results became public. She moved through the room greeting people like nothing had happened. Then she saw me. I wasn't alone. Callum stood beside me, speaking with one of the board members. He looked calm, composed, completely comfortable in the environment. When he noticed Delaney staring, he simply nodded politely. Delaney's expression shifted. Not because I was standing there, but because she could hear the whispers. People were discussing the audit, discussing the financial discrepancies, discussing investor concerns about Graham's firm. Doors were closing quietly. When Delaney approached me, she forced a small smile. I didn't expect to see you here, she said. I was invited, I replied evenly. Her eyes flicked toward Callum. Is he involved now? Yes, I said. Very. For the first time in 12 years, I saw fear in her eyes. Not anger. Not pride. Fear. She realized then that this wasn't emotional revenge. This was consequence. Graham's firm began losing clients. Nothing dramatic at first, just small withdrawals. Then larger ones. Investors don't tolerate risk tied to questionable ethics. Their relationship, once so bold on that stage, became quieter. Less visible. I didn't celebrate their decline. I didn't need to. One evening, Graham showed up at my house unannounced. He looked tired. Less polished. You went too far, he said. I looked at him calmly. No. I finally looked closely. He asked if we could fix things. If there was a way to repair the damage. I answered honestly. You didn't break us that night at the gala, I said. You broke us long before that. He had no response. And for the first time since everything fell apart, I felt something unexpected. Peace. The official audit report was released a month later. It didn't accuse anyone of criminal behavior, but it clearly stated that financial management under Graham's advisory period had shown conflicts of interest and improper oversight. That wording alone was enough to damage credibility. The board publicly announced new compliance measures and thanked me for initiating the review. My name, not his, was attached to transparency and reform. Graham's firm lost 2 major investors within the next quarter. Delaney's PR business quietly lost 3 long-term clients. No one wanted their brand connected to scandal, even if it wasn't criminal. Pressure does strange things to relationships built on secrecy. Through mutual acquaintances, I heard that Graham and Delaney were arguing constantly. Blame started shifting. She claimed he mismanaged the finances. He claimed she pushed for expensive branding strategies. The strong, united front they showed on stage that night began to crumble behind closed doors. One afternoon, Delaney asked to meet. Against my better judgment, I agreed. We met at a quiet cafe we used to visit in college. Sitting across from her felt surreal. She looked tired. Not physically, but emotionally worn down. I never meant to hurt you like that, she said softly. I studied her face. The same face that had smiled at me under those ballroom lights. You meant to replace me, I replied. She swallowed. I thought you'd always be fine. You're strong. You always land on your feet. It was almost insulting. So that made it easier? I asked. She didn't answer. For a moment, I felt the old memories trying to pull at me. Late-night talks, shared dreams, laughter over nothing. But then I remembered the stage. The announcement. The humiliation. You didn't just betray me, I said quietly. You underestimated me. Tears filled her eyes, but I didn't feel anger anymore. Just distance. A few weeks later, I heard they had ended their relationship. No dramatic scene. Just tension, financial strain, and lost reputation slowly tearing them apart. I didn't feel victorious. I felt clear. I focused on rebuilding the foundation. We expanded scholarship programs. We created stricter oversight systems. Donors returned slowly, reassured by transparency. Callum remained by my side. Not dramatically, not rushed. Just steady support. He never pushed, never demanded attention. He simply showed up when it mattered. At the next annual gala, 1 year later, I stood on that same stage. The room was full again. But this time, there were no surprises waiting to humiliate me. There was only truth. Standing on that stage again felt different. A year earlier, I had walked out of that ballroom feeling small and exposed. Now, I stood there steady, not because nothing had hurt me, but because I had survived it. The chandeliers sparkled the same way. The tables were arranged just as beautifully. The guests were dressed in black tie, holding glasses of champagne, waiting for the evening program to begin. But this time, when I stepped up to the microphone, the room was quiet for a different reason. Respect. I spoke about growth, about accountability, about how organizations, like people, become stronger when they face hard truths instead of hiding from them. I thanked the board for supporting transparency. I thanked the donors for trusting us again. I didn't mention Graham. I didn't mention Delaney. They no longer deserved space in my story. After the speech, applause filled the room. Real applause. Not confused or forced, steady and warm. When I stepped down from the stage, Callum was waiting near the side. He didn't say anything dramatic. He simply smiled and handed me a glass of water. You handled that well, he said. I had a good teacher, I replied. Over the past year, he had become more than legal support. He had become someone who listened without judgment. Someone who respected my strength without trying to control it. There was no rush, no grand declarations. Just something honest growing quietly between us. Later that evening, as I moved through the crowd greeting guests, I realized something important. The humiliation that once felt unbearable had shaped me in ways comfort never could. Graham eventually relocated to another state to rebuild his business quietly. Delaney moved away too. I heard bits and pieces about new beginnings and smaller projects. I didn't wish them harm, but I didn't wish them back either. The biggest lesson wasn't revenge. It was clarity. They didn't steal my future. They revealed who didn't belong in it. That night, as the gala came to a close and the last guests began leaving, I stood alone for a moment in the center of the ballroom. I remembered the woman who had walked out in silence the year before. She thought she had lost everything. But she hadn't. She had lost illusions. And sometimes that's the most powerful thing you can lose. I walked out of the building with my head high, not because I wanted them to see me strong, but because I finally was.